Welcome to another edition of Preaching Pointers. In this short video, I would just like to reflect a little bit on some of those individuals who were an early influence in shaping my approach to preaching. And there were three in particular that I would like to mention. The first of those is the Welsh preacher, Dr. Martyn Lloyd-Jones. Reading his books and listening to some recordings of his really drove home the point to me that doctrine doesn't have to be dry and dusty, that in fact truth is transformational. And that was something that really, as I said, struck home to me and influenced my content in my preaching and in my sermons. The importance of preaching the truth, realizing that the truth in itself is the living word, and when taken up by the Spirit, it is transformational in changing people's lives. And so reading Dr. Martyn Lloyd-Jones, listening to him, shaped my perspective on the content of a sermon, on the content of preaching, the importance of preaching the truth. The second influence for me was the English preacher, Charles Haddon Spurgeon, often referred to as the Prince of Preachers. And reading his sermons drove home the point to me that preaching isn't just about the content, it's also about the communication. I was taken and impressed by the way that he would just bring in everyday events, everyday anecdotes, everyday object lessons, which just brought his messages and his sermons alive. And so from him, I picked up the importance of not just content, but how you communicated that content. And then perhaps the third was a book that I read by the American author, J.E. Adams. He wrote a book entitled Preaching with Purpose. And in that book, he discusses how the Bible was written for a purpose, the individual books within that Bible were written for a purpose, the individual passages within books in the Bible were written with a purpose. And as a preacher, our job is to discover and preach that purpose. And if we are going to do that, we also need to be purposeful about the way that we prepare our sermons. And so our content of our sermons, the way we communicate in our sermons, the introduction to our sermons, the conclusion to our sermons, all need to be purposeful if actually we're going to achieve that goal of preaching the purpose for which Scripture has been provided for us. So those three, their writings were an early influence in my approach to preaching. Dr. Martyn Lloyd-Jones, truth is transformational. Spurgeon, it's not just what you communicate, it's how you communicate. And then for J.E. Adams, this idea that the Bible has been written with a purpose. And if we're going to communicate that purpose, all aspects of our preaching must also be purposeful to achieve that goal. Thank you for listening to another edition of Preaching Pointers.